Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes here with Richard Ehrenberg. He's a member of the advisory board of the group Social Security Works and Strengthen Social Security Campaign. Sam Seder, the Majority Report. Don Peebles from President Obama's National Finance Committee, and MSNBC contributor Victoria De Francesco Soto. We're talking about the developments this week in the fiscal curb discussion. And actually, there was some news this week. I mean, it can feel a little bit like a Groundhog Day kind of enterprise covering these negotiations, but there was genuine, really significant news, which is that there's an offer on the table. It's an offer on the table. It's an offer that is quite strong from the perspective of where its relative balance is towards the president's priorities as opposed to the House Republican caucus's priorities, far more in name-specific tax increases than name-specific cuts. And I think the idea of the bargaining position, Rich, as you were saying, is, okay, here we're going to say what taxes we want to increase. You now name the cuts. And I think there's something really interesting. I want to show some polling because I think one of the weirdest dynamics is this mismatch between where public opinion is on something, on what we call on the show social insurance, and where the kind of beltway conversation is about the, quote, entitlements that need to be fixed. And so when you say to people, you will read in the wonk world, and you'll read in Politico, well, people are floating the idea of raising the retirement age on Medicare. This is one of those things. The Republicans are saying, no, it's not enough to sort of whittle around the edges. We need changes in eligibility. That's the red line they've thrown out. Now go ask the American people who have just been through an election, how do you feel about raising the retirement age on Medicare? And this is what they tell you. 71% of Democrats oppose, 68% of Republicans oppose, and 62% of independents oppose. It's very hard to find a less popular, proposal than this, and yet this is at the not even in the margins, at the center of the conversation when people start talking about a grand bargain. And Sam, you were elucidating a kind of argument for why that was right when we went to break.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the establishment in this country, whether it's the political or frankly, the media establishment in this country.
The worst.
They simply do not, they don't have the sensitivity towards this. I mean, when you talk about raising the eligibility for Medicare age, you're talking about privatizing it. The costs aren't going to go away. It's just simply, you're going to say, instead of
for
support,
those 2 years, right?
Instead of support for our seniors, we're going to force these seniors, who in many cases may not be able to afford it, or their kids to pay for it. So this idea that somehow this is, we're burdening our grandkids by not cutting Medicare, well, that's ridiculous.
Right.
Because those grandkids are going to pay for it, and they're actually going to pay more in the private insurance industry than they would through Medicare.
When they get
and that's
old
just
enough.
The fact. And so, and I'm talking about those grandkids literally. They don't they're going to be paying for their grandparents or their parents to get health insurance on those ages if you raise it. So the savings is not going to, it's simply we're going to push it on to individuals, we're going to push it on to the other generations, and we're going to make it cost more because we know that Medicare controls costs more and is delivered more efficiently.
I agree with him, actually, that because the next step of that, of course, is that the kids and the grandkids will be burdened with it, and that's a greater drain in the economy because it takes their money and spending power out of the economy and puts it into healthcare. However, though, I do think there should be some further adjustments on eligibility. For example, someone like me, I do not believe that I should be able to get the same kind of benefits as, say, a retired school teacher. And so, therefore, I should have to pay a greater copay. The threshold before I got any benefits should be there. Now, also, my children, hopefully, if they are successful, I think we have a responsibility to take care of our parents, too, if we can. The government needs to be helping people who can't help themselves, that are going to have difficulty doing that.
And I'm glad you made this argument, because this is the argument that you hear Pete Peterson make, who's a big, sort of funding a lot of the groups that are talking about attacking the debt or the deficit. And you hear Mitch McConnell, but you hear Republicans make it, and you hear some Democrats make it, which is basically, well, look, progressives, you guys care about redistribution and you care about all these things, equality, and we, that's good. Why have these universal benefits when we don't have enough money? Why have universal benefits for people that have a lot of money? I mean, that's the argument, right? That
indexing it.
Right, indexing it, right, making it an adjusted kind of thing.
Means testing. Well,
why not?
First off, Medicare is already means tested.
Yes,
you already do have some measure of that. And if you want to means test it more, there's a very efficient way of doing that. A far more efficient way than to have a new bureaucracy that's going to determine what your net worth is is, and that's called taxation.
Right.
And so we take it from you on the front end.
Right.
And then, frankly, that's what we should be doing with Social Security. We should be obliterating the cap. We can be raising taxes.
When you say obliterating cap, explain what that means.
Well, the cap right now, the first $110,000 of Social Security wages are taxed at about 6% for the employee, at 6% for the employer, a little bit more, 6.5%. And traditionally, we have taken in, through the Social Security system, 90% of the nation's income. We're now at about 81% because of income inequality.
Right.
If we take off that cap, we have complete solvency in Social Security, not just 20 years out, but until my kid has a kid who's looking towards Social Security. And we can do the same thing with Medicare.
Your kid is 40 years old, though. We should
My
say
kid is actually significantly older.
just so that everyone knows what you're saying.
I have a 7-year-old, and it, to the eye can see. And we can do the same thing with Medicare. If you're really concerned about means testing, there's an easy way.
That's interesting. So your point is, don't do it on the benefit side of means test. Just make sure that we're taxing.
Just have people put more money into the system.
What do you think of that, Rich?
Right, I agree with, I mean, I think that the cap is, it creates this regressive pattern, and I mean, I think it's a long-term. It's the long-term solution on Social Security, but I don't think Social Security needs to be on the table.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like it's about. I think we all agree that it's not.
I think Medicare is being discussed.
Same dynamic.
But again, I don't think that we can ask the American people, especially job generators at the top end, to pay more in taxes other than what's being discussed.
Well, you're saying you want job generators to pay more for their health insurance.
Absolutely. At the time of consumption, give it to you in the front end and trust you to spend it well now, or trust the government to spend it well now.
Well, yeah, I trust the government to spend things as well as anybody else, frankly. And
well, that's a frightening thought there. Okay.
Well, but let's talk specifically. Wait a second, though. When we're talking about this, I mean, we could talk about. We should just be very clear, right, about how this actually all works, right? There are Social Security, Medicare have dedicated tax revenue streams, right? So when you're talking about the front end,
Medicare comes from the general fund.
Some of it comes from the general fund, but there's income taxes, then there's a bunch of other taxes in the tax code, and then there's these payroll taxes that you pay that create this distinct funding mechanism for these programs.
Some of the money in the general fund comes from the Social Security Trust Fund.
Right. That's right. Right. That's right.
Yeah.
I wanted to get more to the political aspect of it. So maybe popularly people don't want to see Medicare touched. But the Beltway folks, the folks who are going to be voting on this, do want to see that. So what are we going to bring to the table? Are we just going to say, we're not going to bargain with you? I mean, at what level do we allow for, say, means testing? We may not like it, but that's what's going to allow.
Listen, means testing, we can do means testing. If you want to do means testing, there's a very efficient way of doing it. We will raise your taxes on
if you have more money.
But the reality is that's not going to happen.
But wait a second. We can talk about what we projected.
Look, we can talk about cutting defense spending 20% and cut defense spending 20% and put that into the general fund as well, and we would be able to reduce hold everybody's taxes. But that's an action that's never going to take place.
Wait, can I follow
what she's talking about? What she said is actually very valid. What's the fact is that there's going to have to be some give and take. However, the president has played a very powerful hand by saying, "Okay, tell us what you want."
But let me say this on the give and take.
There's a reason why we can sit here and say it's never going to happen, and it will never happen until people acknowledge the reality of the situation from a policy standpoint. You can say that the Republicans are never going to allow for a more efficient way of means testing, which is to raise taxes.
That's your opinion.
No. That's not
You're not even going to get Democrats. You're not even going to get Democrats
You're
to buy
talking
into
politically,
that. Okay.
but I mean, if you will.
Well, is that reality?
Okay.
Okay.
In reality, hold on.
The fantasy morning is theory.
In reality, if you join me in acknowledging the reality that the most efficient way of means testing Medicare would be to raise Medicare taxes now, that's a reality. Whether or not that's going to happen is another issue. But if you join me, we can join together.
Oh wait, hold on a second. Think about it this way. We just had, we came off in the 2000s, the early to mid 2000s, the biggest boom in the nation's history. Then we went to the second biggest recession in the nation's history. So wealth has been redistributed and lost. Now imagine that concept that you just talked about, where these people have paid into it and now they're in a different income position. That doesn't make sense. We should be any kind of means test should be done at the time of consumption. For example, if I can afford to pay my health care, I should pay for it.
I mean, if we really care about the deficit and debt issues that we're talking about,
yes, but the key thing here is which is my mantra, is that no one actually cares about the deficit and debt.
Well,
the deficit, that's the key thing. People talk about it because it's the word they give to the stuff they really care about.
Right.
Richard Ehrenberg from the Strengthen Social Security Campaign, Sam Seder of the Majority Report, Don Peebles of the President's National Finance Committee, and MSNBC contributor Victoria De Francesco Soto. Thanks for being here. That was great.